lie. I'm feeling a little nervous right now. No pressure.
No pressure.
This is the example.
Give us an update.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of folks in the room that I don't know, so I'm just going to start by introducing myself about our story. And I say our story because I'm the person who has the privilege to be up here telling it, but there's many important people who have contributed to this journey in the room. And I'm just going to call a couple people out. First, my mom, Kathy Millar.
Hi, Mom.
Who is the mother not only to me, but my co-founder, Caitlin Havlack, who's sitting next to, yeah, there we go. And another important person who's here today, CEO of Discourse Community Publishing, Brandy Shire, who's done some amazing work in community news in her own community. So my name is Erin Millar, and I'm the co-founder of the Discourse and IndieGraph. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what these companies are through the story. I started my career as a journalist, primarily reporting in education, and also got to do some really amazing work overseas. And from that vantage point, within very much the status quo system, I worked at the Globe and Mail and Maclean's Magazine and Reader's Digest. I got to see how both the potential of media for change, but also how the system was failing people and failing communities. Not only, and in some cases, that I've learned from a lot of our partners, Indigenous partners, also harming communities. And so in 2014, I left my role as a journalist. I didn't think I was going to be gone this long, but here we are. And founded with several other journalists a company called, at that time, Discourse Media. And our goal was really to develop a new practice for journalism that was truly serving communities. We were seeing that many community newspapers were shutting around the world, and that was leaving communities without access to quality local information and news. Why does that matter from an impact perspective? People who live in communities without access to local news are less likely to vote, to volunteer. They're more likely to get sick because we don't share information about health information. They're less likely even to trust their neighbors, and I think we've really seen the impacts of that in the last couple of years. And so we set out in 2014 to build a new model that would be able to support the kind of community-engaged deep journalism that we wanted to see in the world and that we wanted to, as journalists, be doing. We were all attracted to this field because we wanted to make an impact. That was very, very hard to do, it turns out. I'm here 10 years later, still hacking away at it. But we did eventually develop a model that was working, and very much, but the hardest part, honestly, was accessing the aligned capital to be working not only in an industry that badly needed transformation, but was also in decline. I don't know if any of you have recently considered investing in news media while we're laying off dozens and dozens of people every week. It seems like there's another headline, but it's not exactly the easiest business case to make. And so that was a very, very tricky part of what we did. We became a Coralus venture. I became an activator first, actually, because I got rejected the first time. So those of you who are, keep going. So we became a Coralus venture in 2017, and that really was a turning point for us. We found our people. We found that we could do business in the way that we wanted to, and were able to do that. We finally developed a model that was working and had replicated it in a couple of communities in late 2019. Caitlin and I were thinking about how do we really scale this model. It was so hard to raise enough capital, it was so slow. Meanwhile, there's 2,000 news deserts across North America alone, and many, many beyond that really needed this kind of in-depth work that was making an impact on community. So we started to think about that and kick around an idea for a different kind of company. And the company is called IndieGraph, and that's what we're working on now, which is, we thought, what if we just gave the tools that we needed to do this work to other journalists and other community organizers within communities that see the information that their community needs, rather than grow something centrally owned and become another newspaper chain. Those were the ideas that we were asking ourselves about. And then the pandemic hit, and 50 community newspapers closed down in Canada in the course of 6 weeks. The advertising revenue that was propping up these newspapers collapsed. Brandy can tell you that story very, very vividly because she was publisher of a small family-owned community newspaper called Sun Peaks Independent News. And she lost 90% of her revenue in like 6 days, I think, something like that. Yeah, we were partnered at that time, and we, Brandy was one of the entrepreneurs that we were talking to about like how can we do this. Yeah, and we very quickly launched a new model that, a new digital model in her community that saved that. And eventually, Brandy now is the CEO of the company overseeing that work. I'm realizing we have very little time.
I just saw you look at the clock. Oh my God.
Yeah,
what do I do?
sorry. I thought
It's
we
okay.
had more time.
Okay.
Anyhow, so to share the rest of the story, we launched IndieGraph in May of 2020. Sun Peaks Independent News was one of our first 7 customers. And by the end of that year, we had so much demand to support new startups, transition existing newspapers across Canada, but not only that, coming from the States, that we could not keep up. And now, 3 years later, IndieGraph is supporting 109 publishers and journalists in 109 communities across North America in English, French, and Spanish. Thank you. And we support them with technology, with the services that they need to know how to grow and build these business models, and increasingly with capital. We've also been able to raise $5 million in capital to give micropayments to, grants to help journalism founders who wouldn't otherwise be able to access the capital that they need. So, yeah.
So as we were, thank you for that. In November, when we had our first advisory board meeting, I was playing with this idea of let's add a 0 to what we're doing, or let's at least match the money that we have so that we can invest in more businesses. And Anastasia rightly asked, what are you gonna do with $20 million? Like, it's nothing. Anastasia, she plays big. And so we started to look at, well, if we were actually going to support these entrepreneurs in our community that are really doing transformational work with more capital, who would those people be in our community? So we sort of looked through what was going on, and we started to dream about what this would look like. Very initial conversation. And then Erin was slide 2, and a week later, I got an email from Erin saying, I'm gonna raise more money. And I knew well where she was in her state of growth. And I texted her back and said, I'm holding my nose and saying congratulations. And she's like, what? What do you mean? So I called her and said, what's that gonna do to your ownership if you raise right now? Because she had a situation coming up where she was gonna get a large check from a philanthropist in the US, and I just, if she had held to that, she wouldn't have to give up this equity. And she said it's gonna leave us about 50-50, is that right?
Caitlin and I combined, were just teetering on the edge of not having majority ownership of the company with this financing that we needed to take on. And so close to being able to access the aligned capital, but it was gonna take another year to get to where we needed to get. So yeah.
And my response is from years of experiencing beautiful dreams, take capital that wasn't aligned, and then lost impact is what I would just call it. So like a sea of lost impact. Because when you're so stuck and you need that capital and you have this dream, you'll tell yourself any story when you take that money. I'm sure it'll be fine, it won't be me. That's what I did when I was in my 30s. I'm like, I got this. And then I did not have this. And so at the same time, there had been all these different things along the way with our model where for years now, been seeing things that are not quite right that need redesign, but everything's a kind of timing issue. When do you do these things? So I was holding on to quite a bit of that. But when she was telling me this story, I realized that we had put $1 million into a government investment certificate, which was another indicator to me that this isn't working anymore. We want all the capital flowing, but we didn't have a place to put it in Canada. And we needed to redesign how we're using money collectively. And so it popped into my head when she said this, and I said, if we were to invest $1 million into what you're doing, what would it enable you to do? And what impact would it have? And you went back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I wrote you a long letter. I wrote, yeah, I don't know how you guys feel, but once in a while Vicki pops up in my life, and then I have like a hangover for several days afterwards while I'm processing, right? That's what it was like, because Caitlin and I had literally pitched 70 venture investors who typically invest in high growth technology companies like we were doing over the past 6 weeks, and we'd finally found our answer. And Vicki was like, "Are you sure that's your answer?" And I was like, "Oh God." But I just want to make it really concrete what aligned capital is not, because I think that makes this clear. So what we are doing with IndieGraph is lowering the barrier to entry to make it possible for folks who really are connected to their communities to create media outlets and own their own narratives. Where that is most powerful from a community impact perspective are in the communities that have been ignored by the traditional system because they're lower economic communities, or because they're communities that are dealing with racism in the legacy media outlet, or by legacy media, etc. This is where this is having the most impact. And those are the customers that investors value the least. So what I heard again and again while I was pitching, and we were in a place where we could say no to people, thankfully, was, well, if you just focused on the higher value customers, then we could invest in this, right? If you didn't focus on Kansas City Defender, where we have an incredible young Black journalist entrepreneur who actually, he doesn't call himself a journalist, we call him a journalist, he told me. He's just using our tools. Who literally has built the largest audience of young Black folk, 6 million people that he reaches. Yes, in Kansas and Missouri of any media outlet. And he is, he's doing that by telling stories that they really want to hear, by covering local basketball, by covering local arts and culture, but also doing the deep social justice work and telling the stories that will literally be ignored otherwise, putting stories on the Washington Post. That's the kind of work that we're doing. So that's one piece. Another piece around what not aligned capital looks like. Another question I got from some investors that I spoke to during this time was, what are your positions on editorial guardrails? So what you're platforming. And I would say we have a very clear focus. We do not platform misinformation. We do not platform hate. We do not platform anything that incites folks to violence or anything like that, but particularly misinformation and what could be interpreted as hate speech. And I had multiple investors say to me, that seems like a constraint on your growth. So, and that's, I don't want to say that everybody would do that, but in that context, it is so important for Caitlin and I as co-founders to maintain ownership of this company at this stage of its growth so that we can stay in our integrity and so that we can build those really important pieces of our impact not only into our business model and our policies and all of these different things because we're not yet ready to let go of that control for this company to truly transform our industry in the way that we believe that it can.
So, yeah, right? Yep. So Erin came back with, here's what it would be possible. If you invested, if you let us use some of the use of proceeds to buy out our early note holders, a little bit, what this means is people, did convertible notes early. She would just pay 5% interest and get that ownership back. So it would allow her to have more ownership / more freedom so she could be in her integrity. If you let us do that, we would be around 56, anyway, a larger number than 50%. And then if this community became an investor, it would get us up in the 60-something range, and it would give us, they would be freed to do the work that they want, the way that they want to do it. And so a few other iterations around this, back and forth around what the impact would be, maybe a future where this is community-owned. We brainstormed all kinds of things. And it was a very fluid experience. Like, you do a slide, you say we're going to do something, then a phone call comes, then you realize there's money in the bank. Like, it was just this follow the breadcrumbs. And so we reached out to quite a few people in the community to talk about how they'd feel about this. We want to be moving in this new direction. It was an of-the-moment thing. And so we then got into this process of, like, if we invested, what are all the issues? And one of the things I want to share with all of us is, I hadn't even realized this ourselves, but do people know what accredited investing is? Yeah, for some of you. So there's all these rules that you have to have a certain amount of money before you can invest, which keeps those who have money making more money, and those who don't can't. We are now officially an accredited investor as a community because we hacked that. And so all of us have made $1 million investment into IndieGraph. And in the next 2 years, they're going to go into 200 underserved communities, which we believed would have even more of an impact that we would have had with that money. And so this is the beginning. Yeah, this is a beginning example of where we're going. And so our slides for this new capital raise to do what we're going to do had imagine if we had this money to do this, and now we don't have to say imagine if anymore because we already started it. So we're very, very excited. No pressure to see how you do. But this is the beginning, right? This is the beginning of, like, no more lost impact, folks. No more lost impact. Let's find the folks to help us support these ventures.
Yeah, I think the reason I was so nervous when I came up here is just because of what an honor it is to, be leading one of the first ventures, the first venture that is experiencing this kind of transformation. And being at the retreat on Bowen Island this weekend really brought home for me just how there are so many companies in this community and so much work in this community that deserve the kind of support and capital and love that I've gotten from this community, that IndieGraph and Discourse have benefited from this community. And it's extremely, like, humbling and to be given that kind of support. So I just want to say thank you so much. And what my commitment is to really contribute as much as I can to creating this model so that we can see other entrepreneurs and other ventures that really are working on that systems change, being able to do that work and do that for you and model that as much as I can and try to do that. I think about, when you say lost impact, I just think about some of the ventures that I've gotten to know on this journey in this room in the last while, and just some of the work that is so transformative that has not been able to happen because of the pressures of this financial system and the risk and the impacts on all of you individually. And so, you know who you are. Let's find another way and build another way to really treat social entrepreneurs and impact entrepreneurs in the way that they really deserve. So
thank you. So, yeah.